In the middle of a rural landscape, between sky and earth, a summit rises. A landmark that can be seen for kilometers, the Notre-Dame de Chartres Cathedral. It dominates the town and plains of Beauce in the heart of France. Built in barely 30 years in the 13th century, its architecture tells the insatiable quest for grandeur of the builders of the Middle Ages. By its scale, the monument was to bear witness to the power of the Catholic Church. Today, it is considered as an emblem of Gothic architecture, which later influenced other buildings throughout France. Religious life still holds an important place in the cathedral. A place of pilgrimage, of ordinary celebrations, but also of exceptional ones, like the ordination of a young priest this morning.
Nicolas, fils bien-aimé, veux-tu devenir prêtre pour servir et guider sans relâche le peuple de Dieu sous la conduite de l'Esprit Saint?
Oui, je le veux, avec la grâce de Dieu.
Confions à la miséricorde de Dieu.
Ordination is one of the 7 sacraments of the Church.
Demandons-lui
It is conferred by the bishop on the young deacon within the cathedral.
de son esprit.
By lying on the ground, this young priest, just ordained, expresses his humility and his complete readiness to the divine call to which he will dedicate his life.
Nous te présentons
La paix soit avec toi. Sois le serviteur dont le Seigneur a besoin et dont son peuple a besoin.
Century after century, the cathedral lives to the rhythm of the services. These celebrations are all the more vibrant because they take place within the walls of an exceptional monument, designed and conceived to stimulate the devotions of the faithful. Chartres, along with the cathedrals of Bourges, Amiens, and Reims, inaugurated the Century of Cathedrals. It was the advent of the classical Gothic style, marked by a move towards the vertical and the balance of forms. Its monumental structure was to accommodate a very large number of followers. Mathieu Lours is an art historian and specialist in sacred architecture.
Chartres is not the largest of the Gothic cathedrals. It is not the highest. Nevertheless, it is quite exceptional. We can compare it a little bit to what the Parthenon is to Greek art, that is to say, a cathedral that embodies a form of stylistic perfection at a given moment. We are dealing here with a kind of classicism. We have a relationship between the large arches, the triforium, and the small high windows that is perfectly balanced. We have an extremely coherent decoration between stained glass and statuary. In Chartres, we try to find the right balance between the full and the empty, between darkness and light. The darkness disappears, the light triumphs, and therefore Chartres is a bit at the crossroads in this sense. Then next we will have cathedrals with radiant Gothic art that will give preeminence to light and finesse.
It is thanks to the technique of the crossing of ogives which directs the vault onto the pillars and not onto the walls, making it possible to install large stained glass windows up to 15 meters high and to let the light in. Another Gothic specificity, the buttresses on the exterior. All the stability of the cathedral rests on them. The shape of the building is that of a Latin cross. The nave is 130 meters long with a transept of 64 meters. At the crossroads of the transept is the vast choir to accommodate a large number of clergy. Among the treasures of the Cathedral of Chartres, the choir tower. Originally, this enclosure had the function of separating the choir where the liturgy was held and the parts reserved for pilgrims. The clergy on one side, the faithful on the other. The entire cathedral is dedicated to the Virgin. Thus, many scenes of this choir tower are devoted to episodes of her life. Marie-Suzanne de Ponto is an architect responsible for historical monuments.
In 1506, the canons decided to call upon Parisian sculptors of great renown. They had brought in all the greatest sculptors of the time to carry out this 100-meter-long project. We have 40 scenes, over 7 or 8 meters high, that represent the whole life of the Virgin and the life of Christ.
In the 16th century, the Catholic Church reformed and encouraged a reconciliation between the clergy and the faithful. Many choir towers disappeared, but that of Chartres, then under construction, was preserved. Its presence and scale constitute one of the peculiarities of the cathedral. Today, a major restoration campaign is underway. Composed of 1,000 nooks and crannies, this immense body of stone requires meticulous work. The aim is to dust the sculptures, remove soot from them, strengthen the most damaged areas, and fill in cracks. To regain the original brightness, each centimeter is cleaned with a brush and latex without using water or chemicals so as to preserve the stone.
Working as closely as possible like that, it really makes us very intimate with the details. We really get to know and recognize the small elements. We realize that each is really unique, that each artist or each sculptor really handled these things, and with these small specificities, the sculptors must surely have had a very strong faith and a will to work for God, for the Lord, and therefore really to do something great and long-lasting.
This choir tower is quite unique. We have other choir towers in France, but with so many figures and on such a scale here, we can really talk about it in terms of being monumental. There are things that are at the back, facing inwards, and so it's a feat of the sculptor who, to please himself, says that everything must be perfect in detail, even what is not visible, because it's visible from the heavens.
Everyone knew Chartres Cathedral as being very black. When we went inside, the stained glass windows were also very opaque. The stone and the plaster were therefore very dirty. And we really want to find the dazzling luminosity of the 13th century again. as much as I would say on the architectural and aesthetic level as on the spiritual level. The cathedral is currently recovering all its original luminosity.
For architects of the Middle Ages, light is the manifestation of God's existence that must be honored in cathedrals. 2,600 square meters of stained glass windows spread this divine light across the building.
So the function of these stained glass windows is twofold. That is to say, it is both practical and spiritual. Practical because it is the opportunity to illuminate the buildings more, which is the very principle of Gothic architecture. And then spiritual because the Gothic is obviously the illustration of medieval philosophy in which God is light. At the time, the literate obviously spoke in Latin, and in Latin there are two words to say light. You can say lumen, physical light, or you can say lux, divine light. And the art of stained glass is precisely the possibility of uniting the two. It is both the light that comes from God and the light that enlightens the faithful. And this is a particularity of the Western Church. Here in Chartres, we are really reaching the pinnacle of this system.
In order to spread the message of Christianity to non-literate pilgrims, the stained glass windows show more than 5,000 characters from the Old and New Testaments. They must bring us into a world radically different from the earthly world. Each color has one or more symbols. Thus, red can be both the red of the angelic choirs or the red of the devil.
These colors are meant to illustrate the presence of divine light, and it's here that the material takes revenge on the spirit, because theoretically, divine light is the color of gold. In the first centuries of the Byzantine Empire, it is the gold of the mosaics which expresses the divine light. So what color can be used to illustrate divine light if gold is not available? It's the color blue, which from the 12th and 13th centuries takes over the spiritual power of gold. This is going to be one of the major transformations in Western art, meaning that this blue will be validated as the celestial blue, as the divine heavens. It is also the blue of the physical skies.
It was therefore the Middle Ages that gave the color blue its status of nobility. The Virgin was the first figure represented in blue, as on this stained glass window of Notre-Dame de la Belverrière, dating from the ancient Romanesque cathedral, which burned down in 1194.
So on this stained glass window of Notre-Dame de Belverrière, we have a rather exceptional case, because we have a remounting of stained glass windows from the 1180s that dates from the previous building. This is the panel we see here with the Virgin and Christ on her knees. The bay is decorated with stained glass windows dating from the 13th century and can be seen immediately because of the contrast of the blues. This cobalt blue of the 12th century, known as the Chartres blue, contrasts with the manganese blue of the 13th century, which was easier to produce in large quantities.
This famous cobalt blue, as seen on Mary's robe, was therefore no longer produced after the 12th century. Elsewhere in France, the wars destroyed most of the stained glass windows composed of this bright blue. Because it still exists on several pieces of stained glass in Chartres, it was later called Bleu de Chartres, or Chartres blue. Covered by dust, pollution, candle smoke, the stained glass windows lose their brilliance over time. They must be cleaned regularly. For several years, a vast restoration project has been underway. The master glassmaker's workshop is located a few kilometers away from Chartres. Marie-Suzanne de Ponto supervises the work with Claire Babet, the restoration manager.
So we had to go a little further because the lead was very weak. And therefore, on these two figures, we made localized interventions. Here we have the new lead, up to here, and here we connect with the lead from the 19th century, which is here, all the old lead.
In the Middle Ages, stained glass was assembled with molten lead between the tiles. To restore them, it is therefore necessary to remove the residue and stains and then re-weld the joints.
The stained glass was very bright, since here we see the grain on the face of the Virgin, which is due to corrosion on the outside. And so it was actually even more transparent than that. The windows were very bright.
Arnaud Housset works on stained glass that was broken and assembled with lead in the 19th century. To restore the stained glass's clarity, he must remove the metal and replace it with glue.
So right now I'm doing some gluing. It was the old lead that was once here which made it very difficult to read or view the stained glass windows. And with current technology, glue has proven itself, and this is what is used to make these windows viewable and to simply restore them to their original state. So a feature of this mainly 15th century glass is very often we see paintings that were made inside, but also outside. And outside it would have rained and degraded. So this is what's left on it. It's pretty fascinating, quite rough. But it's something very tactile. It feels good. The 15th century was a beautiful period for stained glass, when we also knew how to work with clear glass and others that were a little whiter. It's a work of light modulation that makes them come alive.
For me, the greatest moment of emotion is the moment when we clean the glass and we discover, having started from something relatively illegible and often very black, that little by little, like an archaeologist scraping away, we see something appear. And we ask ourselves, as we saw earlier, the extraordinary details of the finesse of the work, how at that time the stained glass painter could have done that. And then you know that you won't get this close again to the stained glass windows for several decades. So you have to try to make the most of everything you can observe today. But when you're on a lit table, you have a vision that you don't have at all once the window is installed.
It's our job to have them in close-up. For us, it's more than just proximity. We end up owning the work a little bit, or at least for a short moment in the life of the work, it belongs to us.
After months in the workshop, the restored stained glass windows can finally find their place in the cathedral in their original decoration, sitting in daylight. Since the restoration work began in 1986, 60% of the stained glass windows have passed into the hands of the master glassmakers.
It's nice because you can see the finished job. We see the piece in the workshop, but only little by little, and then you start to see the whole window bay. That's very satisfying. We've given life to the window again. It's very nice. It's true there's a bit of magic in the stained glass. It lives only by the light that passes through it, and this light is constantly changing, which means it's actually alive. It changes all the time.
With its stained glass windows from different periods, from the 12th to the 20th century, Notre-Dame de Chartres tells the story of this stained glass art. The builders therefore wanted a luminous and grandiose monument, but also one endowed with symbols combining Christian faith and Greek thought, the Middle Ages and antiquity. These encounters are embodied in the labyrinth of the central nave. Gilles Fresson is an historian and steward of Chartres Cathedral. In Greek mythology, the labyrinth was built by Daedalus to lock up the Minotaur, that half-man, half-bull monster to which young Athenians were sacrificed. In order to put an end to this carnage and free the city, Theseus volunteers to kill the Minotaur in the labyrinth, from which he finds the exit thanks to Ariadne's thread.
From a Christian perspective, Theseus is Christ, and the Minotaur is Satan, but above all, death. On Easter evening, Christ crosses the underworld, comes to face death and defeat it, and offers all humanity the possibility of joining eternal life.
An invitation to penance and meditation, the labyrinth symbolizes human existence. In the 13th century, walking this path simulates a pilgrimage to Jerusalem.
The labyrinth of the cathedral includes more than 260 meters of winding path, so lots of turns and hairpins that lead to a center. The final center can be likened to paradise, eternity, and heavenly Jerusalem. Conversely, the complication of this voyage, which is the first stage of the journey, with its bends, suggests the difficulty of earthly life with sin, with doubts, and with spiritual struggles.
Just like the labyrinth, other details also testify to this will to mix ancient and religious thought. This is the case with the royal portal. On the arches of its side doors are statues of great Greek and Latin authors, such as Cicero for rhetoric, Aristotle for dialectics, and Pythagoras for music. The gates and facade have also been restored in recent years. Work which allowed new discoveries, traces of paint on the statues. They are indeed the proof that in the Middle Ages, in most of the great Christian sanctuaries, figurines were painted in order to be as realistic as possible in the eyes of the faithful.
Color is life. However, since these statues evoke living beings, they were done in color. And so there were no differences between the stained glass windows, statues, and paintings. In the Middle Ages, they only used one word to say that. They used the word imago, images. It's the image of the Virgin, the image of Christ. Medieval man lives in a society in which color is not present in everyday life. Most of the objects are in unbleached canvas or wood. But in the cathedral, color is present all the time. And in addition, during the great celebrations in the cathedral, we will add tapestries or decorations that will add more color. The cathedral remains an exceptional place, and yet here it is in the middle of the city, accessible to all.
Thanks to these night illuminations, it is possible to imagine what the cathedral looked like 7 centuries ago. Bright, colorful, an expression of human genius, the Notre-Dame de Chartres Cathedral defies the ravages of time. A masterpiece of the Middle Ages, a Gothic emblem, it stands today imposing like a precious witness to the great history of Christian architecture.